Project Montauk?
Well, his connection was that he created the equipment, or I should say some of the equipment, that became the foundation of what was used at Montauk. Tesla equipment was used in the Eldridge to make it invisible, and Tesla equipment was used in the Montauk chair that many of your listeners have heard of in order to open up vortices into other realities and dimensions. And so it was a mix of what he created along with alien and Atlantean technology that was also recovered and used during that time.
We've got a silence.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I know Cold and I were talking about underground bases.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been into any of these underground bases?
Well, Montauk was an underground base. So yes, and I have been in several others during the course of my work at Montauk. I was, especially in the late 70s and early 80s, I was on loan, if you will, to other intelligence services in other countries. I was sent to England, France, parts of the Caribbean, other countries, Russia, all these other countries where they had their own experimentation, and they had their own underground bases. One of the largest bases that I had been in, which I wrote about, was in northwestern Iran in 1979, near the city of Rasht, which is right on the Caspian Sea. There's a big underground base there. And in fact, now the Iranians are using it as a nuclear facility under there. So yeah, there are many, many bases, at least 130 in the continental United States under the ground. There are bases under the ocean, under the Arctic and Antarctic. They're in pretty much every continent.
I do apologize, guys. My phone dropped the call.
Okay, you're back on. So
I'm back on.
We were going to ask about Phil Schneider. Is that correct, Cole?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to talk about Phil Schneider because, Stewart, there's a lot of people within our truth-seeking movement that completely and totally ignore the extraterrestrial aspect to it. And the first place I point everybody is Phil Schneider. Phil Schneider claimed that he murdered 2 Greys, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the story. And he was involved heavy with the research with subterranean bases, so we wanted to talk to you about him. What are your thoughts on Phil Schneider?
Well, he was telling the truth. And in fact, he was murdered. He did not die the way they claimed that he died.
Of course not.
Yeah, he was absolutely murdered. He spoke a lot about Dulce Base in the Four Corners area, which is the oldest and one of the largest underground bases on the Earth. That was built in 1954. And if you look on history of earthquakes in the U.S., you will see that in April of 1954 was one of the largest earthquakes in the U.S. in this area of New Mexico, even though there's no fault lines there, and there's never been earthquakes there before or since. Basically what that was a nuclear underground blast to open up a cavern there that they then used in order to build a 9-layer base.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
The first top 3 layers, or floors, I should say, or levels of the base were for human habitation only. The second 3 levels were for cohabitation of human and alien. And the lower 3 levels were only for alien habitation. Now, that was in 1954. Then in 1969, it was discovered that the aliens were lying to the government and that they were actually kidnapping people, that they were supposed to let people know, the government know who they were taking, and they were supposed to be returning them, and they weren't. And they found an area that they called Nightmare Hall. And in Nightmare Hall, which was on level 7, they were doing all kinds of hybridization experimentation, mixing human with alien, human with animal, human with insect, insect with alien. I mean, every combo you can imagine, and they were holding people as hostage. And then they found vats of blood in which these large winged reptilian creatures were being gestated. And so the government went in and tried to attack this level, and of course the aliens had weapons that the Delta teams didn't have, and basically the aliens won that attack and took over the base.
Are there any books off the top of your head that our listeners can go get and read about it?
Well, I know I wrote about it in Montauk Alien Connection because it was because of that incident in 1969 that Montauk Project was developed in 1970 as a response. So that's where my connection to it came in. So I did write about that.
So Phil Schneider was not a crazy person, as a lot of people say. Phil Schneider was, in fact, telling the truth, and that's the reason why he was murdered. He was murdered for telling the truth.
That's right. That's absolutely right. As many people have been. You know, the Clintons are famous for that. Sure.
And then anybody that doesn't, anybody that's listening that happens to be a Clinton fan, all you need to do is go watch a documentary called The Clinton Chronicles. That'll get you started.
And I will even say, you know, that one of the most famous hits that they made was John F. Kennedy Jr.
That's right. He went down in the plane crash.
Right, and then he couldn't run against her for senator because he would have won.
He definitely would have won. No doubt about it. Mm-hmm. What are the Greys' connection to what's going on right now, current events?
Well, you know, I need to go back a little bit and describe what they really are.
Go ahead.
If you take a picture of a Grey, the ones that are famous in abduction history, and then you take a photo of a human fetus and you put them side by side, you would have a very hard time telling them apart. And the reason is that the Greys are a manufactured race. Basically what they are fetuses grown to larger proportions and then mind-controlled to perform functions. They're not a real race. They're manufactured. And that's why they're hormonally imbalanced, and they need human harmonics to survive because they're undeveloped fetuses for all intents and purposes. And that's what they are. They are used by the reptilians as a slave race. And there's many different versions of them.
So it would be the reptilians and the Illuminati. The reptilians are the 13 Illuminati bloodlines, right?
Well, the bloodline, the Illuminati, come from the Draco Empire, that race. And you know, all human beings have reptilian genetics in them. It's just a question of the percentages. Those with the highest reptilian genetics are what the Illuminati call blue blood, because the reptilian blood is higher copper-based, and when copper oxidizes, it turns a blue-green color, and that's where the term blue blood came from.
You had mentioned the earthquake, and there's been an influx of crazy disasters between earthquakes and cyclones and hurricanes and typhoons. I wanted to know what your thoughts were, if this is all connected to HAARP, or does this have anything to do with the Nibiru theory? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I will tell you that the North and South poles are being heavily bombarded by ELF and microwave. And even the government claims they don't know where it's coming from and have set up an office in Denver, Colorado to study it, but of course they know where it's coming from because they're doing it. What it does is it disrupts the balance of the tectonic plates and makes them move in ways that they wouldn't have naturally moved unless eons of time had passed. So what we're seeing is a speeding up of catastrophes that would have taken hundreds or thousands of years to develop, but we're seeing them happen within days and weeks and months. And the purpose is to create a state of fear and catastrophe so that the government can impose rules and regulations on the population in order to supposedly control the civil unrest that will occur afterwards. I will tell you, the earthquakes we've been seeing yesterday and today in the Pacific Northwest are nothing compared to what's coming. And I will also warn